So welcome to our next speaker presentation in our speaker series with Marlysue Holmquist. This will be a presentation that she has done about Amalia Rabenius, who was a early professor at Bethany College in the Slöyd department. So I will let you take it from there, Marlysue.
Thank you. Welcome to all the people that are there. I will start this by just kind of giving a little bit of a story about a table that I got. And so that's how we're going to start this particular presentation. But in beginning, I need to say that I have often wondered why Lindsborg was so full of artists and craftspeople, inventors, entrepreneurs. More than most small Kansas towns, we have had so many people in the Smoky Valley who produced artwork. And they lived in the community, and they had many people who had great respect for their skills. So I'd like to tell you about one more person who helped solidify the cultural skills that were passed down from the early Swedes in the Smoky Valley, and how I get to know about her a little bit. So what you see on your screen, the first slide, is a table. And when I was at an auction in Lindsborg, I spotted this table under a tree in the auction site. And I was fascinated with it, thinking it was a carved table. And so I began to bid on it, and I purchased it at the Jederberg auction in Lindsborg. The Jederberg was a long time family in the Lindsborg region. I liked it because at the very bottom, on the bottom shelf, here's the table again. You can see the bottom shelf at the bottom. And this bottom shelf had snakes on it. And because my family name is Esping, which means little green snake in Sweden, I was rather fascinated by the fact that there were snakes on it. And so I began to bid on the table, and I won the bid and got the table. I thought it was carved. I thought there was carvings all over it. This is one of the end pieces of the table, and it looks as if there is a Christian sign there of the Lutheran faith. But you can also see that there are pegs on the legs, which is indicative of the Slöyd patterns that we're going to be talking about, but also of the arts and crafts movement. And so this was a really different kind of a table. It can actually, the pegs can be pulled out and the table can collapse. As I used a flashlight to really look at the table outside, one of the things I spotted in the very upper left-hand corner there were some initials. This is the top of the table. And here are the initials I found. And I could not stop thinking about who this might be. It looked like it was an R, looked like it was an A. And finally, I made a phone call. For you who know the Jederberg family, I called Eddie Jederberg. And I asked her if she knew anything about the table because it had come from their family. And if she happened to know who AR was. And she said, yes, she did. She told me that it was Amalia Rabenius, and that table had belonged to Einar and Elizabeth Jederberg, and that's whose sale I purchased it at. And she said that the table, let me go back up a second so you can see the table. The table had been a library table in the home of Thuri Jederberg, and he'd gotten the table when Carl Aaron Swenson's wife, Alma, sold off a number of furniture pieces from their home after the death of Carl Aaron Swenson. The children had played on the table. They had laid on that bottom rung where the snakes are and had played on it many times. She said that it was all she knew about it was someone named Amalia Rabenius, and she'd been a teacher at Bethany College. So that's kind of what led me on this quest to find out about the table. But initially, that was I wanted to find out if the woman that she told me had made it was a great carver or what this was about. So I went to look, and this is the person that I found. Her name is Amalia. She happens to be pictured in the dress that she wore with the Swedish folk dancers, and she was a Swedish folk dancer in Lindsborg. And this happened to be a Christmas card that she had done for Hagbard and Minna Brasi in 1907. She was a good friend of the Brasi family and spent a good deal of time with them. And she actually had come across the ocean with Minna, who became Hagbard's bride. And so she had known the family for a long time. And this was a very young woman. She had traveled from Rhode Island to Kansas, and she oftentimes went back to Sweden, but she had studied in Sweden. She was Swedish and she had studied there. And she had studied a place called Ness, Naas, and it was a school in Sweden. And many, many people had studied at that particular school. And she was trained there as a teacher in Slöyd. We'll get to the word Slöyd in a little bit because that is a little tricky regarding the kind of Slöyd that I'm talking about tonight. Slöyd, which is known as educational Slöyd, if you notice it's Sloyd, it began in Finland in 1865 and it was introduced by a man named Uno Signaeus. He was a clergyman and an an educator as a system of handicraft-based education, a little bit what we call the same thing now as hands-on learning. And he used this within the public school system in Finland. And so the concept of Slöyd, Sloyd, came from Finland. Amalia studied in 1896 the Slöyd methods at the School of Crafts at Ness, and she completed all the requirements to be a teacher of educational Slöyd. And then she immigrated with her brother in 1897. Her brother actually completed his degree as a pastor, and he was a pastor in Pontiac, Rhode Island. And Amalia then taught Slöyd in Rhode Island for 1 year before coming to Lindsborg. I'm going to go back again to Slöyd because this is going to be a thread through the whole entire thing. This is an English version of the Swedish word. There are no umlauts about it, and you can see it's S-L-O-Y instead of S-L-O-J-D. This particular word was translated by a man named Salomon, who called his particular program the educational Slöyd, and he thought the word, with that little bit of a change from the Y from the J to the Y, would actually be unique and would indicate his particular program. And so he wanted to change that and see if he could actually make a worldwide program of Slöyd. This is August Abrahamson. He was a wealthy Jewish merchant. He purchased a very long house named Ness, that he called Ness, and that's where Slöyd was taught. This was very unusual that he, as a very wealthy person, would buy this without any intentions for it. But he had been speaking to his nephew, Otto Salminen, and the nephew had developed this system of teaching handicraft at Ness, and he needed the financial backing of his uncle, and his uncle was a very wealthy man. And so they started this school at Ness together, and they were doing a lot of teaching of a lot of different people. Now, the interesting thing was that the people that they were, you will see in a couple of pictures coming up, the people that they were actually had at the school were males and females who were taking the Slöyd training. This in itself was a bit of something new, because for women in Sweden and for women who came here from Sweden, there were not a lot of opportunities for employment and a differentiation of jobs for them. So oftentimes they became domestic workers. It was very common for women in this area of Kansas to leave and go to Denver, for an example, to be a domestic servant for families there. So by picking up a skill in Sweden, which was very unusual, it gave Amalia Rabenius the opportunity to do something different with her life other than being a domestic servant. I have a book called, I have to find it here real quick, I Go to America. And it is a book that's called about Swedish American women and the life of Minna Anderson. And Amalia Rabenius is mentioned in that book. And that is because her coming here as a single woman with a skill was unusual. She did not come with the idea that she would become a domestic servant or a hired person, but she actually had a skill that would help her to make some opportunities for herself. So here again is Ness. The 17th century mansion was near Gothenburg, Sweden. And in the 19th century, it was known as a crafts college. And that particular building that you see there is still available to visit in Ness, Sweden now. There's still programs there and opportunities for you to study in Slöyd and some of the things that they've had there for years and years and years. This particular thing is again, it's a drawing of nests. But one of the things that Salomon wanted to do was to expand the Slöyd program out of Sweden. He had gotten the idea from Finland, but he wanted to expand it out worldwide. So his uncle Abrahamson sent letters to numerous Swedish ambassadors asking them to look at and send letters on their behalf to nations where they were, suggesting that they send people to nests for training. They had at least 40 nations that sent people. So one of the things in my research that I found is that there were Slöyd programs that were developed because of these programs' availability in everywhere from Cuba to Thailand and everywhere in between, that there were many, many, many people who were educated in this system where they could take these skills back and use the skills to teach the young people. In Sweden today, this is still a requirement that you take Slöyd handwork in the schools. And again, this is Amalia. This is her school picture in 1897. I had some help from the people at Ness who are very nice about sending information and letting me know. And they sent these pictures that they actually have school pictures from back in those days. And this is what she looked like when she was in school there. And again, one of the remarkable things about her and this system was that she was allowed to teach Slöyd, which was including woodworking, and that was unusual for those days. The Swedish teachers that came from Sweden were taught the Slöyd methods, and it still is a required subject, and women were allowed in, which was also unusual. It took the place of the manual arts training that was pretty prevalent in those days in many, many places, especially in the United States. And because there was a belief that there's a connection between creating things with your hands and your cognitive development, which is a philosophy we still embrace in education in the United States today, that was important. That's what they thought was really vitally important to making sure that children were learning something to do physically with their hands. So Slöjd, S-L-O-J-D, which is the first original word, actually the second original word in Sweden. It does translate as crafts, handicraft, or handiwork. It refers to woodworking. A lot of times it's woodworking, but also it became origami type paper folding, sewing, embroidery, knitting, crocheting, anything you could do with your hands. And it wasn't necessarily as a way to make money, but it became that. But it did follow through on so many of the handwork of spoon making, of plate making, of farm handles, of different tools in the households in Sweden. It followed through with those things which were being done early on in Sweden in the first place. And you notice again, that's S-L-O-J-D with an umlaut. That's the early Swedish translation. So Slöjd, from the English word slug, meaning skillful, handy, and deft with a dexterity of hand. That's a quote. And what I'm showing you is a picture of the sign that Malcolm Esping made, this sign for his shop in Lindsborg, as he was a craftsman and artist there, making a variety of handicrafts. He did metalwork, he did woodworking, he did small items like wedding crowns and rings, but he also did the sign that you're seeing there that actually was the signage for his shop. And he did many other metalworking wrought iron signs that are all the way around Lindsborg. He did some work for Bethany Church. He did some of the many, many candle holders there that they use at Christmas. Those were things that were made in this Slöyd shop. There's also in Lindsborg, you'll see signs for hemslöjd, which a hem is for home and slöjd is for handicrafts. And that was very common in Sweden, that there was a nature of having some kind of hemslöjd in the home where things were being made there. So that was, and that's common to us in Lindsborg now, this particular word of hemslöjd. The Slöyd, S-L-O-Y-D, is more than a word for handicraft. It became a philosophy. That's the main part that I thought was interesting about the Slöyd program that was brought into Lindsborg to Bethany College. It was definitely hands-on learning, and it was a philosophy about how you teach children. And that's what Amalia Rabenius brought with her. This whole list, I won't read the whole list here, but it was really a way of teaching children to do independence, do independent work, self-reliance. They used mathematics, and they would give the children the instructions, and through those instructions, they would teach them how to do certain projects, to train them in habits of orderliness and cleanliness and neatness and dexterity, all of those things by doing the set amount of projects that they actually made, and to do very exacting work, because you could not move to the next project until you had completed, and I'll show you some pictures in a few minutes of that, you had to complete each one of the things in order. And so you had to get them right or you didn't get to move on. Usually the Slöyd classes were for men, and then they opened it up to women, and it was unusual for women to do woodworking. But at Ness, they opened that up. So I have to give a real shout out to Abrahamson and Salomon, who looked at that particular world in the 1800s differently by allowing women to come into the classes and to learn to do the manual work that had been exclusively for men. It was a major shift in thinking to allow women to learn all the manual skills. This picture again was given to me by the School of Ness, and I think this is a remarkable photo. It's from the time when she was there, and if you look at the top row on the left side and you count in 6, you'll see that Amalia is there in the white blouse between 2 men, and this was the photo that was taken of that class of people there were at the time. I counted them, and there were 97 people in the picture, so she had quite a large class of people that were there. And I do know that the school at Ness has listings of where all these people came from to study, and those are available. One of the things that I just thought was amazing is that people from Cuba came, which meant a long boat ride to get to Sweden. But Solomon and Abraham made sure that there was some scholarship money for people to come in order to get them to come and study, and to make sure that this program of study went worldwide. They actually were providing some of the cash and some of the money for them, and the living and expenses while they were there. But you can see it was a large class of people, and I hope you were able to count over 6 from the top row, and you would be able to see Amalia's picture there. And I'm getting a click. So, okay. The Slöyd was a series of handwork. And so one of the first things that was given out was the Slöyd knife. At the time that I have spoken to people about this, most of us sort of look at this and say, you're going to give a child who is 8 years old this knife to use in a classroom, which I think is probably, most of us kind of wonder about whether this was the best idea. But this was the first thing. The knife was the first thing. The kids learned to use that knife. They learned how to go ahead and use this on a simple piece of wood. And this was the very first piece that they were given. Now this is a picture that comes from the North Bennett Street School, which was developed as Slöyd School by Gustav Larsson. And they took all these different pictures of the different objects. And what you see, and you will see a few of these things come through in some other pictures I have, but what you see are different projects. And there was a listing of projects. You started at the very first project, and when you had mastered that, then the teacher said, okay, now you can go to the next project. So it was a very definitively structured program, and yet it was also unstructured. The teachers didn't touch the students' work. They gave them the instructions, they gave them the tools, and the students were to start working. They learned from their mistakes, and after the success, after they were able to have success with that project, and they were completed to the students, to the teachers' satisfaction, they then went on to something else. And you can see here in this particular picture many, many different pieces that were considered Slöyd projects. especially look at the chair. Look at that chair that's sitting there, because that one's going to pop up again in a little bit. But you can see that the definition of that chair. And if you look at the chair that you will be seeing, the chair also has the same kind of pegging to it that the table I showed you had, that comes apart. So it actually can be taken apart and packed away. So Rabenius was hired in 1900 to come to Lindsborg and teach in the model school. She was to teach Slöyd. She was also the lady principal in the dormitory, so she was responsible in the dormitory for the college students. And her employment really expanded the different kinds of offerings that were at Bethany College at that time. So in the college catalog, you'll see it for Slöyd, pyrography, and art embroidery. So she was those three plus the lady principal. And then in the summertime, she taught Swedish school at Bethany Lutheran Church. Swedish school was held for children. There was a belief that public school was okay, the reading and the writing and so forth, but you needed to continue Swedish school in the Swedish language to continue your studies there as well. And so that was an important thing. And there were dozens of Swedish schools in this particular region, but she taught at the Bethany Lutheran Church School. So the model school actually began at Bethany College in 1886. Bethany had a lot of layers of education. And the model school was for the younger kids. And so it was equivalent somewhat to an elementary school. And so that part of it started so that children from the ages of 10 through 16 could come in and get some education. And it was a 6-year program. Not all students were enrolled in Rabenius's classes. They were not mandatory at that time, although they became mandatory later. And some of the people that were in her class were not all students. And this is one of the parts that I had fun with, because I realized who she was and what she was doing, and that she brought a whole different element of the arts and crafts into Lindsborg, because she layered onto some of the things that were already being done there. And and you'll see some of that, because there already was an art program, but this was a different kind of a program. But you can see some of the names like Marie Malmberg, Anna Carlson, Lydia Solberg, and others. And for me, one of the most important things was reading some of the class lists and finding out that Birger Sanzane actually took classes from her. Now, Sanzane was not a child, of course, but he must have liked what she was doing, and he signed up along with Lydia Solberg, who took over the program in 1907. So at that time, the art curriculum at Bethany in 1890, there was an art program, and that was Lucy Osgood and Hannah Swenson and Marie Swenson and Addie Covell. And they taught drawing and oil painting and crayon work, which I also thought was fascinating, and watercolor painting. And the chair at that time, Grafstrom was there, who was a very prolific artist on his own right, and he was the chair of the department. Then Latov came over and took over from him in 1897. And then Sanzane was hired in 1899, the year before Rabenius came. So he was there, but he was not very old. He was about 23 years old when he took over the department in 1899. So he was already there with some of the art teachers in the college and the upper level sections. You see here, if you have to look at the bottom of this, and down at the very bottom, you'll see the name of Amalia Rabenius, lady principal, instructor in Slöyd, pyrography, and embroidery. And she's listed there, although she is in the model school teaching. It was kind of convoluted. There were a lot of students taking a lot of different subjects depending on what was available. The Slöyd, the next couple of pictures actually come from the old catalogs. And I was really taken with the names on here. I marked it up, as you can see, but the Slöyd group was quite large. She had a lot of kids in that particular class, and she had some very familiar, Swenson and Thorstenberg and Van Loon, and lots of Anderson and Hoagland and Johnsons. So a lot of these names were quite familiar. Rosengren, Nels Rosengren, who's on the list, was actually one of the people whose father began the broom factory in Lindsborg. And down below, you can see pyrography and art needlework, and that's her other class that she was teaching. She didn't have nearly as many in that. And those people they appear to be mostly women. So she had 33 kids in this class. And again, I'm going to go back to the chair because as I found these lists, and I was so astounded that Burgess Hussein had taken her class that I started looking toward, what did he know? What did he do? What was he involved in or something? And so one of the things that popped up was a tip that someone told me that Bethany Lutheran Church has some handmade things on a cabinet in their basement. So I went to look at that, and you can see the definite Slöyd design that the other photograph had on it that showed a lot about that this was one of the projects that had been done. And this one actually belonged to Carl Aaron Swinson. It was given to Bethany Lutheran Church, and that is that Slöyd design. We're not sure who the maker of this one was. I'm sorry, I have to go back to this a second. I got ahead of myself. One of the things that I did was I went to the Sanzane Gallery and talked to Ron Michaels and said, do you know anything at all about if Sanzane ever did any kind of work in wood, what we would call Slöyd or pyrography, which is wood burning? And he said, yes, come to the basement, come see what I've got. So as I went through these things with Ron Michael, you'll see some really great work that Sanzane did. So he really took off on it. And one of the letters he wrote home to his father was this letter. I have lately, in my free time, amused myself with crafts. And that crafts word is a real important one. He made a chair in the Old Norse style called Fritjof Saga the illustrations come from, and you will see through the next pieces that through most of his pieces, there's some weapons and things from Fritjof Saga that he put on his work. And he did a lot of pyrography or wood burning and a lot of the Slöyd work. And he says to his father, the chair was artistic and original. It was purchased by Bethany College and sent as a Christmas present to Colonel C.A. Smith in Minneapolis, who has given more money to our school than anyone else. So I was a little wondering about the C.A. Smith a little bit. So I'll briefly divert here to C.A. Smith. He was a Minnesota businessman who donated all the lumber to build Ling Gymnasium in Lindsborg, which was about $25,000 worth of lumber. And he had also given other financial donations in the way of scholarship money and so forth. And so they sent him this chair as a thank you present. And he has been, as you can see, if you can read underneath there, that he'd been a friend of Bethany since its very infancy. Carl Aaron Swinson seemed to have the ability to really garner support and to talk people into doing things. So we are not sure exactly how he talked Amalia Rabenius into coming to Lindsborg because those letters are non-existent. But we do know that there was a lot of links and a lot of people he talked to and a lot of fundraising he did, and the Smith was one of those people. So that's where one of the chairs that Sanzane did went to Colonel Smith. Here's a chair, not the chair, but a chair like the one that he sent to Colonel Smith. And a number of the things that when Ron and I started looking for Sanzane's work, we went to his studio, which is in Lindsborg. And as I turned around, here were piece after piece after piece that had been done. And he had done them with what we call poker work, in the same way that Rabenius did her work. You can see that it is the gouges on the side and the top. Those gouges are made with a heated tool, and then you oftentimes would draw a picture on it and then go ahead and wood burn around it. And then oftentimes, like this one, was stained, and you can see where that stain is. But this is part of a chair that he did, like the one that was sent to Colonel Smith. And here's a picture of it. You can see again the dragons. There's a number of pieces that on the seat there. You can see another dragon at the bottom. And this one also is pegged so it can come apart. This was a game table that we found in the basement, and it's a remarkable piece all over as she did her work on that first table I showed you. The whole thing is embellished, not one or two things, but every piece and part, every ledge, every little piece of it is embellished with wood burning. This is a bookcase that was found in the attic at the Brossi house in Lindsborg. And Burgess on Zane was a good friend with the Brossis, and this one held the music, because Brossi was one of the music professors, and this held a stack of his music. And again, you can see the dragons going up the side. I'm lucky enough to have this in my home now, and the shelving on the outside of the shelving is burned. The top side, every piece of it has the wood burning on it. This is a large bench that he had. The Sanzane has this in their basement, a large basement. Sorry, a large bench. And again, lots of things on the seat. You'll see weapons. You can't see that very well, but there are weapons that have been burned into that seat area. Oh, now you see it. And these are indicative of Fridolf's saga. This is a cabinet that he did. And even if you look at the top where you can see where it looks like there's the opening pieces, well, it's all wood burned, every piece of it. And the sides are wood burned, the top is wood burned. This is a small stool that was in his studio that he's added color to. I have a kit that you can use to do coloring of this, and I'll get back to that one in a minute, but this is just a small stool. I wanted to show you a picture of Gian Malm, and you can see again that the dresses that the women are wearing at the Swedish dancing that is in front of the pavilion. Gian Malm was actually the director of the Swedish dancers at the time, and Amalia Rabenius was one of the dancers. And this was one of the costumes they had. But I show you this because I want you to know who he was, but also because he also began doing pyrography and Slöyd. So this one is a chair that was made by him for Ruth Built, and it was purchased at an auction and given to Bethany Lutheran Church, and it's also down there. And Elizabeth Jaderberg was one of the people who were instrumental in making sure some of these pieces were kept. She died not long after I found the table, and I had corresponded with her about the table that I had in the original. And she told me about some of these pieces I needed to look for. And sure enough, here was one of them by Gian Malm, who also learned from Amalia Rabenius. Gian Malm added color to his. This is a chair that he did. And adding the color comes from a different way of doing things. You do the original pyrography, but then you're able to add the color in afterwards so that most of his have some coloration to them. This is one of my favorite pieces. I thought that was just an amazing thing of the angels there in the front. This is the arm of that same chair that has some colorations. And you can see the gouging. You can see that it's not like the wood burning that I did in Girl Scouts. This is not like that. This is with a heavy heated point where you're gouging into the wood. This is a poker work kit that I have that was given to me. Someone bought it here in Lindsborg, and I like to think it probably was Gian Malm's, but I have no proof of that. But you actually have the pump part of it and benzene fumes through a heated hollow pencil. I have all these pieces that are part of this kit. And the bottles in the very back actually have some green paint left in them and some white paint left in it. And there's a bottle where you heat it and you use a hose, and so that's how the tinting process and the shading was added. This is a frame that Gian Malm did. This is the women's basketball team at Bethany, and he did a frame around it, and he did all of the woodworking on that and all of the pyrography. This is a bowl that came from the Jaderberg family, and it was actually given to them at a point in their life when someone brought cookies to them in this bowl. Unfortunately, this bowl was sold to a woman in California, so it's out there. She's enjoying it, but it was made by Amalia Rabenius as well. I just want to show you some of the things that we were assembled at one point in 2019, we assembled all these different pieces and pulled up the things out of the basement of the Sanzane to try to show the people of Lindsborg what this Slöyd pyrography program was about. So there's a number of pieces here that we were able to show, and a number of people in the community, excuse me, a number of people in the community who loaned us a couple of pieces for the show, because it was really quite extensive. Most of them are privately owned, with the chairs and so forth, but a lot of them came from the basement of the Sanzane, where they have a lot of Sanzane's work. This is one more picture of Amalia Rabenius. She was a member of the Sunshine Society, the Sunflower Club, and I'm interested in why she was in black when all the other women were in white, but I don't have any idea whether that was an element of mourning, an element of age, exactly what it was about. The woman in the very front, who has is second from the left, that's one of my sister's in-laws in her marriage. So it's an interesting photo for us. She left Lindsborg in 1907, and she took a position as a superintendent of the Lutheran Children's Home in Avon, Massachusetts. She left a legacy of crafts and handwork in Lindsborg. I am completely amazed at what she was able to do. There were so many pieces and parts of what she gave back to Lindsborg in the way of the handcraft. Lydia Solberg took over in 1907 when Rabenius left. So Lydia Solberg became the lady principal, and she was instructor in art embroidery when Rabenius went to Massachusetts. However, they no longer did any of the Slöyd projects and any of the pyrography. So they were doing art embroidery. Lydia Deer also began actually this is Lydia Solberg, who became Lydia Deer. And so Lydia Deer began the Society for Scandinavian Handwork in 1927, so just a number of years later, and it became the Lindsborg Swedish Club. And there were some other women's handwork groups that continued doing some of the handwork that Rabenius had been teaching at that time. And one of them was the West Side Club, and there was a Lindsborg Swedish Club, and there was a couple of other handwork clubs that were a little bit more exclusive, including the one at Bethany Lutheran Church. But they did preserve the handwork of Sweden and Scandinavia by ordering their patterns and their materials from Sweden. And actually, some of them came through the Jaderberg's business downtown. Crocheting, knitting, crewel work, china painting became a big thing. Weaving, tatting, hardanger, drawn thread, art embroidery. All of these things were done by the women. And you can see the one red piece on the right, which is one of the pieces that was done by Mrs. Brossi when she and Rabenius were meeting and doing handwork. Amalia, when she moved back to Massachusetts, which was a good thing since she was closer to her family, I suppose. And so she died there, and she's buried in the St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Rhode Island, in the same family plot as her brother Carl. She left a huge legacy of crafts in Lindsborg for us. The kinds of things that I showed you in the way of artwork, what was interesting for me was that she not only taught the children, because actually she was an active member in the Lindsborg community. She owned a home there, and she did handwork with other groups. But she was a young woman who came to the prairies of Kansas by herself. And again, I'm sure that Carl Aaron Swenson was very much in the middle of trying to talk her into starting a new program, because he was pretty good at that. But she taught over 350 children during the time she was here to make craft projects with wood, cloth, pyrography, and to use the tools in the Slöyd program, and the same ways that generations of early Swedes used them to make what they needed in their homes for daily life. And especially prior to the Industrial Revolution, they were making things in their home, and that's how they used things. She taught 350 young people those skills, along with Jian Mom and San Zane and some of the other adults in her classes. But she left her work here on us in the Smoky Valley. That that work was pretty instrumental, I believe, in having set a foundation for the kinds of things that other people did, because we are known as an arts and crafts community. We are known as a spot where art is revered and respected. And so I think that that was a large part of what she did for us as she came into this area. I wanted to make sure that I emphasize the fact that there were a number of Slöyd programs in the United States around the same time that she arrived here. That large group of people that were coming out of the Ness school were coming also to around the world. The most notable was in Boston at the North Bennett School there, which is actually still there. You can still go there if you want to and take Slöyd classes. There was one in Santa Barbara, California, Los Angeles Public Schools. In the city where I grew up in Downey, California, there was a Slöyd program in the early years. And one of the most notable Slöyd teachers that came from Ness was a woman named Anna Ehrenberg, who began a weaving program at Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. She was a long-time respected program, and it's still in existence now. The weaving that you get at the craft school there came from that intervention that she brought to Kentucky at that time. I believe that Amalia Rabenius did the same thing for Lindsborg that Anna Ehrenberg did for Berea, that she started a legacy here that I think is ongoing. And this part Elizabeth Jaderberg wrote about Lindsborg has always been a haven for artists and craftsmen and painters. And among those, she named some of the most strident people like Olaf Grafström and Latov and Charlie Rogers and Alba Malm, Lester Raymer, Signe Larsson, Carl Peterson, Malcolm Esping. But I think we need to add to that list Amalia Maria Rabenius, who has been instrumental, I believe, in getting people started in the arts and the crafts and the woodworking and the handwork. And I think we need to make sure that we include her in some of the work that we are talking about in saving information about the early Lindsborg times. So that's the end of my presentation for you. I know it's a quick, brief overview, but I think that the Slöyd program in Lindsborg is important, and that Amalia Rabenius was an important person for us to know about. So I think if you have any questions, that we have a little bit of time for that. And if not, we'll see. So do we have anybody that has a question about anything that we need to know?
Thank you, Marlysue. I did neglect to mention at the very beginning that this is a project of Smoky Valley Historical Association in partnership with the Lindsborg Old Mill and Swedish Heritage Museum, and that this is being funded by a Humanities Kansas grant. So thank you for your presentation, and we will open it up for questions if anybody has questions.
I want to make sure I say thank you to the Historical Society for doing that, because I think that some of the recordings about these unknown people are really vital for us to have. So thank you.
Thank you. So I will going to stop the recording, and then if anyone has questions, we'll open that up.